Okay, imagine a scenario for a second. You're, say, 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You're just starting to figure out who you are, maybe navigating your first real job, or, trying to manage a budget that doesn't consist entirely of instant noodles and hope.
Right, I have the picture. Standard young adult chaos.
You're young, you're inexperienced, and you're just looking for a little direction.
Sure.
Now, imagine that tomorrow morning you wake up, check your email, and find out you've been named the CEO of a multinational corporation.
Okay, a bit of a step up.
But not just any corporation. This one owns half the known world. And here's the catch. The board of directors actively hates you. Your biggest competitor is trying to physically kidnap you.
Wow.
A hostile takeover is happening in your eastern branch, and your HR department, which in this case is the Catholic Church, is literally ripping itself in half.
That is a nightmare scenario. And just to add to the pressure, let's say you don't actually speak the language of your corporate headquarters and you're maybe physically unwell.
In chronic pain, even.
Yeah.
Exactly. Welcome to the life of Charles V. Today, we are diving deep into the inbox of the man who held arguably the most stressful job in human history.
Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, Lord of the Netherlands.
Ruler of the Americas, the list just goes on and on.
It really is a staggering list of titles. When we look at the source material for this deep dive, we aren't just looking at a king. We are looking at the CEO of the first true superpower in history.
And you know that famous phrase?
The empire on which the sun never sets.
Exactly. Most people associate that with Queen Victoria and the British Empire, right? Pith helmets and tea.
Right, but the phrase was originally coined for the collection of realms controlled by Charles V centuries earlier.
Centuries.
His influence stretched across the Holy Roman Empire in Germany, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, and of course, the newly conquered territories in the Americas. He was the CEO of the world, essentially.
And that's the hook for this deep dive.
Right.
We aren't just looking at a biography of a guy in tights. We're looking at a man who inherited a board game where he owned the winning pieces before he even rolled the dice.
But the central tension in all these documents is this concept of universal monarchy. What exactly does that mean in this context?
It sounds so medieval.
It was the great medieval dream. The idea was to have one king, one faith, a united Christendom. Charles V spent his entire life trying to revive this ideal.
So he saw himself as more than just a ruler of land.
Oh, absolutely. He viewed himself as the shepherd of Christendom. He truly believed it was his divine duty to keep the flock together.
But the tragedy and the fascination of his story is the timing. He's trying to build this unity at the exact moment the world is fracturing, isn't he?
Precisely. It's just terrible timing. You have the Protestant Reformation tearing the religious fabric apart.
Internally.
You have the rise of intense nationalism in places like France where they stop caring about Christendom and start caring about France. And you have the Ottoman Empire pressing in from the east. He's trying to hold on to a medieval ideal in a world that is rapidly sprinting toward modernity.
So our mission today is to figure out how one man managed this impossible inheritance. We're going to look at the toll it took on his physical and mental health, the absurd amount of frequent flyer miles he racked up, and ultimately, his unprecedented decision to just walk away.
It is incredibly rare. A person who owns the world voluntarily giving it up. Power is usually something you have to pry from someone's cold, dead hands.
So true. But before we get to the end, we have to understand the beginning. How did he end up with all this real estate in the first place?
Oh yeah, how did that happen?
Let's get into the first part of our discussion. The genetic lottery. Because Charles didn't conquer this empire, right? He didn't ride in on a horse and take it by force like Alexander the Great or Napoleon. Yeah. He just was born.
He was the ultimate beneficiary of a very specific, very patient strategy. There's a famous Latin saying regarding his family, the Habsburgs, Bella gerant ali tu felix Austria nube.
My Latin is non-existent. Translate that for me.
It means, let others wage war, but thou, O happy Austria, marry.
That's a great slogan. Much better than we conquer via hostile takeover.
It continues. For those kingdoms which Mars gives to others, Venus gives to thee. Mars being the god of war, Venus the goddess of love.
So their whole strategy was based on marriage.
The Habsburgs were masters of the strategic marriage. Charles V is essentially the result of the most successful merger and acquisition strategy in European history.
So let's break down the family tree, because looking at the charts, it's a bit of a tangled web, but the payoff is huge. Who are the grandparents that made this happen?
Okay, so let's start on the paternal side, his father's side.
Yeah.
His father was Philip the Handsome. Philip's parents were Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor and Mary of Burgundy.
Okay, stop there. So from that union, Charles inherits Austria.
The traditional Habsburg heartland.
And the Burgundy Netherlands.
And don't underestimate the Netherlands. We aren't just talking about tulips and windmills. In the 1500s, this was the Silicon Valley meets Wall Street of Europe.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Wealthy trading cities like Ghent, Bruges, and Antwerp. They were manufacturing centers, banking hubs. The wool trade with England made them fantastically rich. It's a huge inheritance on its own. It provided the cash flow for everything else.
Right. But then you look at his maternal grandparents. His mother was Joanna of Castile. Her parents were Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile.
The famous Catholic monarch.
The ones who finished the Reconquista and funded Columbus.
The very same. So from them, Charles inherits Spain, which was actually a union of the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon.
Which is a big deal in itself.
Plus parts of Italy like Naples and Sicily, and crucially this exploding massive territory in the Americas that was just being mapped out.
It feels like he rolled a natural 20 on his birth stats. He has the money from the Netherlands, the prestige from Austria, the military power from Spain, and the just raw potential of the New World.
It's an unbelievable combination. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. Reading through the background, he wasn't supposed to get all of this.
No.
He wasn't the primary heir for everything, was he?
Not at all. He was an accidental king in many ways. If you look at the Spanish side, his mother, Joanna, was a younger daughter.
So she wasn't first in line?
Not even close.
No.
There was a whole line of succession ahead of her. There was Prince John, her older brother, the golden boy, the heir apparent.
Okay.
There was her older sister, Isabella, Queen of Portugal, and then Isabella's son, Miguel.
So what happened? Did he eliminate them?
No, nothing so sinister. It was just nature. A series of really tragic deaths cleared the path. It's like a Final Destination movie from the Renaissance.
Wow.
Prince John died in 1497. Isabella died in 1498 during childbirth. Her son, Miguel, who would have united Spain and Portugal, died as a baby in 1500.
So in the span of 3 years.
The entire line of succession is wiped out, and suddenly Joanna is the heiress to all of Spain.
And Joanna's situation is tragic in its own right.
Extremely. Joanna's husband, Philip the Handsome Charles's dad, died young in 1506. Joanna was devastated. She was eventually deemed mentally unstable. History remembers her as Joanna the Mad, though that is a very controversial and complex label today.
Right. Many historians now argue she was just politically inconvenient and essentially gaslit by her own father and son.
A very strong case for that. But regardless, the outcome was that she was confined to a castle in Tordesillas for decades.
So the political result was that Charles, her son, became the effective ruler of everything at a very young age.
Yes. He inherited the Netherlands at age 6. He became king of Spain at 16.
Imagine being 16. Most 16-year-olds can't keep their room clean, and he's handed the keys to Spain. But looking at the accounts of his arrival in Spain, he wasn't exactly welcomed with a parade, was he?
No. This introduces the stranger king dynamic, which is really important to understand his character. You have to remember, Charles was born in Ghent, in Flanders.
In the Netherlands.
His first language was French. He grew up in the Burgundian court, which was very opulent, very chivalrous, think knights and tournaments. When he arrived in Spain to claim his crown, he looked foreign, he dressed in foreign clothes, and he didn't speak a word of Castilian.
That's a bad start for a new boss. Hello, I am your king. I don't understand what you're saying, but send me your money.
It gets worse. He arrived with a massive entourage of Flemish advisors, his friends from home, and he started giving them lucrative Spanish offices and titles.
Oh, no.
He essentially promised the Spanish Cortes, their parliament, that he wouldn't appoint foreigners, and then he immediately broke that promise. The Spanish saw him as a foreign prince looting their country to fund his ambitions elsewhere.
Which actually led to a rebellion, didn't it? The revolt of the Comuneros.
Yes, in the 1520s. And it was a serious civil war. It wasn't just a protest. Entire cities were rising up.
So this was a real threat to his rule.
A huge threat. The rebels actually went to Tordesillas and tried to get his mother, Joanna, to sign a document deposing Charles and taking the throne herself.
That would have been a massive plot twist. What did she do?
She refused to sign against her son, which essentially saved his reign. But it was a harsh lesson for Charles. He learned that he couldn't just be an absentee landlord.
He had to become Spanish.
He realized he had to respect local customs. He stayed in Spain, he learned Spanish fluently, and eventually he earned their respect. He became His Catholic Majesty.
I love that quote attributed to him about languages.
I speak Spanish to God.
Italian to women, French to men, and German to my horse.
It is a great line. It's likely apocryphal, or at least polished by history, but it reflects the reality of his life. He was a multinational corporation in human form. He had to be different things to different people. He had to code switch constantly.
Which brings us to the sheer logistics of this job. Let's move into the threats he faced, because once he has all these titles, he realizes everyone wants a piece of him.
It's like playing whack-a-mole on a continental scale.
The logistics were a nightmare. Because he wanted to be a universal monarch, he couldn't just sit in a capital city like Paris or London.
He didn't have a fixed capital.
Right. He spent his life on the road. I have the numbers here from our sources, and they are exhausting just to read.
Lay them on me.
He made 40 major journeys across Europe. He spent 10,000 days in the Low Countries, 6,500 days in Spain, 3,000 in Germany, and 1,000 in Italy.
Think about what travel was like in the early 16th century. We aren't talking about private jets or high-speed trains.
No, this is muddy roads, horse-drawn carriages with no suspension, and dangerous storms at sea.
He spent literally years of his life just getting from point A to point B. He wrote in a letter, "My life has been one long journey."
And it wasn't cheap. You'd think owning the Americas makes you rich. He has literal mountains of silver coming in. But the sources say he was constantly broke. How is that possible?
It's the classic startup problem: high revenue, but insane burn rate. Wars are incredibly expensive. Mercenary armies need to be paid in gold, and they need to be paid on time.
And if you don't pay your mercenaries,
They don't just quit, they sack your own cities. Charles was relying on massive high-interest loans from the great banking families, the Fuggers and the Welsers. He was borrowing against future income from the colonies. He was essentially running a massive deficit to fund the defense of the empire.
defense against who? Let's talk about the rivalries. Enemy number one seems to be France.
Francis I of France, he was Charles's great nemesis. If Charles was the stoic, dutiful, serious CEO, Francis was the dashing, charismatic, playboy rival.
And France was physically stuck in the middle of Charles's lands, right?
Exactly. Look at a map from the time. Charles owned Spain to the south, the Netherlands to the north, and the Holy Roman Empire to the east.
France is encircled.
Completely. Francis, I felt claustrophobic. He felt he had to fight his way out of this Habsburg ring or France would be suffocated.
And they fought a lot. But there is one battle that stands out in the records. The Battle of Pavia in 1525.
This was the climax of their rivalry. They met in Italy. Charles's forces, using new tactics with arquebusiers, these early guns, absolutely crushed the French army.
A total victory.
But they didn't just win. They captured Francis III.
The King of France himself.
On his birthday, no less.
Talk about a bad birthday present. So Charles has the King of France in prison. That should be checkmate, shouldn't it? Game over.
It should have been. Charles kept him in Madrid. They signed the Treaty of Madrid. Francis gave up land, renounced claims in Italy. He signed everything just to get free. The moment he crossed the border back into France on his horse, he reportedly shouted, "I am still the king," and claimed he signed that under duress. He tore the treaty up.
That is bold.
Yeah.
Dishonorable maybe, but bold.
It's politics. But Francis I was so desperate to break the Habsburg encirclement that he did something unthinkable for a king who called himself the most Christian king.
He allied with the Ottoman Empire.
The scandal. I can only imagine the PR nightmare that caused it in the 1500s.
It was huge, the lily and the crescent. France allied with the Muslim superpower to attack the Christian emperor. This brings us to enemy number two, the Ottoman Empire.
Suleiman the Magnificent.
A rival emperor, in a way.
Absolutely. And Suleiman was pressing deep into Europe. In 1529, the Ottomans were at the gates of Vienna. This wasn't a remote border skirmish. This was an existential threat to Central Europe.
If Vienna fell, the road to Germany was open.
The fear in Europe was palpable. The Turk was the bogeyman of the age.
And it wasn't just on land. The Mediterranean was a war zone.
The Barbary pirates, led by figures like Barbarossa and backed by the Ottomans, were terrorizing the coasts of Spain and Italy. They were kidnapping people from coastal villages to sell into slavery.
A constant threat.
Charles felt a personal duty to stop this. He actually led military expeditions himself. He had a great victory at Tunis in 1535. He was hailed as a hero of Christendom, depicted in art as a Roman emperor.
But then there was Algiers in 1541.
A complete disaster, a total humiliation. He insisted on attacking late in the season against the advice of his admirals. A massive storm hit. He lost 150 ships.
150 ships.
Just gone. He had to retreat. It showed that even the emperor couldn't control the weather or the sea. It was a check on his ego.
So he's fighting the French in the west, the Ottomans in the east and south. And then from the inside, the floor starts rotting. Enemy number 3, Martin Luther.
The internal fracture. The Protestant Reformation starts right at the beginning of Charles's reign as emperor. He summons Luther to the Diet of Worms in 1521.
Just for our listeners, the Diet of Worms is a meeting in the city of Worms, not a weird culinary choice.
Correct. An imperial assembly. Charles expects Luther to back down. He's the emperor. He expects this monk to apologize and return to the fold.
But Luther refuses.
He refuses. And Charles issues his famous declaration. He lists his ancestors, the emperors, the kings of Spain, the archdukes, and says they were all faithful to the church. And then he says, that monk will never make me a heretic.
He draws a line in the sand. But, and here's the whack-a-mole there, he doesn't crush the Protestants. Why not? If he's the emperor, why not just arrest them all or burn them as heretics immediately?
This is the central tragedy of his political life. He wanted to crush the heresy. He believed it was his duty. But he needed the German princes, many of whom were turning Protestant.
He needed their armies.
He needed their troops to fight the Ottomans.
So he's trapped. If he attacks the Lutherans, the Ottomans take Vienna. If he fights the Ottomans, the Lutherans spread.
Exactly. He was forced into these temporary truces, like the standstill of Nuremberg. He had to tolerate the thing he hated most just to keep the empire physically safe.
And that tolerance allowed the Reformation to put down deep roots.
It did. By the time he finally went to war against the Schmalkaldic League, the Protestant alliance, it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle. Europe was religiously divided, and his dream of a united Christendom was dead.
It sounds exhausting. Just lifting it is exhausting. But we have to pivot to the one area that was actually making money, even if it brought a whole new set of headaches.
The New World.
Let's talk about the New World and the moral crisis.
This is a fascinating part of Charles's reign because it challenges the stereotype of the ruthless conqueror.
We mentioned the money, the quintain real, the royal fifth. This is the 20% tax on all precious metals mined in the Americas. This is what paid the bankers and the armies.
The conquest of the Aztecs by Cortez and the Incas by Pizarro happened on Charles's watch. He was receiving ships full of bullion, but unlike many rulers who would just take the cash and look the other way, he actually had a crisis of conscience.
This is the aha moment for me in the research, an emperor pausing to ask, are we the baddies?
Essentially, yes. He was hearing reports from missionaries, specifically a Dominican friar named Bartolomé de las Casas, about the atrocities being committed against the indigenous people.
And Las Casas did not hold back in his descriptions.
No, he was graphic. He talked about the encomienda system, which was basically forced labor slavery in all but name, and how it was brutal. Las Casas told Charles that these conquests were unjust, illegal in the eyes of God, and that the indigenous people were being destroyed.
So what did he do? Did he just send a strongly worded letter?
He did much more than that. In 1542, he passed the New Laws. These were radical for the time.
What did they do?
They banned the enslavement of indigenous people and, crucially, stated that the encomiendas could not be inherited. So when the current holder died, the land and the people reverted to the crown.
It was an attempt to dismantle the colonial feudal system.
Exactly.
I imagine the conquistadors guys like the Pizarros who had just fought through jungles, risked their lives, and felt they were owed this land, didn't take that well.
It caused a civil war. In Peru, the settlers rebelled. They were furious. They actually killed the viceroy that Charles sent to enforce the laws.
They killed the king's representative.
They did. Gonzalo Pizarro, brother of Francisco, basically ruled Peru as an independent king for a while.
Charles had backed down a bit to regain control, didn't he?
He did. He had to revoke the inheritance clause to stop the bleeding and regain loyalty, but he stood firm on the slavery issue, and he crushed the rebellion. Pizarro's head ended up on a pike. But the most remarkable thing happened in 1550.
The Valladolid debate.
Yes. Charles V literally ordered a halt to conquests. Imagine that. The most powerful expansionist engine in the world, and he hits the brakes. He stopped the expansion of the empire to hold a debate in the city of Valladolid.
What was the debate about?
He brought in the best minds of the de las Casas, who argued for indigenous rights, and Juan Ginés de Sepúlveda, a famous scholar who argued that some people were natural slaves, according to Aristotle.
So they were debating the very soul of the indigenous people.
And the very justification for the empire itself. Think about that for a second. The most powerful man in the world pauses his empire building to have a philosophy debate about human rights.
It was the first time a European empire halted expansion to discuss the morality of colonization. Now, we have to be realistic. Did it fix everything?
No, of course not. The abuse continued on the ground. The distance between the laws in Spain and the reality in Peru was vast. But the fact that the debate happened and that the crown legally recognized indigenous people as subjects with rights, not just resources, was a significant moment in the history of international law.
It shows a depth to Charles that you don't see in a caricature of a king. He wasn't just a warlord. He was a man wrestling with his soul.
Which is a perfect transition to the next part of our analysis, the man behind the crown. Because while his soul was willing, his body was falling apart.
We have to talk about the jaw, the Habsburg jaw. It's in all the portraits. If you've seen a painting of him by Titian, you can't miss it.
It is the defining feature. In medical terms, it's mandibular prognathism. His lower jaw jutted out so far that his teeth didn't meet. He couldn't close his mouth properly.
Sources say he had trouble chewing his food.
He couldn't chew. He had to swallow his food almost whole, which led to terrible indigestion his entire life. He also spoke with a lisp because of it. It was a source of mockery for his enemies.
And sadly, this was the result of generations of inbreeding. The happy Austria marriage strategy had a severe genetic cost.
Marrying your cousins for centuries will do that.
And his diet didn't help. He reportedly loved red meat and beer.
He suffered from severe gout. If you've never had gout, it is described as feeling like your joints are being crushed by glass.
Agonizing.
By the end of his life, he couldn't walk. He had to be carried in a litter or a chair. He was in constant, agonizing pain while trying to rule the world.
But despite the pain and the deformity, he wasn't a loveless political robot. He actually had a real romance.
This is the softer side of Charles. He married Isabella of Portugal in 1526. It was originally a political match uniting Spain, and Portugal is always good strategy, but they fell deeply in love.
The sources mention their honeymoon in Granada.
They spent months at the Alhambra. It was the happiest time of his life. He even commissioned a Renaissance palace right there inside the Alhambra complex, the Palace of Charles V, though it was never finished.
And she wasn't just a wife, she was a political partner.
Absolutely. When he was away on his endless wars, she ruled Spain as regent. And by all accounts, she was incredibly capable. She wasn't just a figurehead.
And when she died?
It broke him. She died in 1539. Charles was devastated. He shut himself in a monastery for 2 months. He never remarried, which was very rare for a king who could have used another marriage for a new alliance.
He wore black for the rest of his life.
For almost 20 years. And he commissioned Titian, his favorite painter, to create posthumous portraits of her. He carried those paintings with him everywhere he went.
Even to his final retirement.
Yes. I think it's also important to highlight the other women in his life. The Habsburg Empire seems to have been run by women behind the scenes.
It's a crucial point. Because Charles was always traveling, he relied on his female relatives to govern the pieces he left behind.
His Aunt Margaret of Austria and his sister Mary of Hungary served as governors of the Netherlands.
And they were brilliant administrators. They dealt with the trade guilds, they kept the money flowing, and they kept the provinces quiet while Charles was off fighting.
He literally couldn't have managed the empire without them.
So let's reset the scene. We have a man who is physically broken, grieving his wife, exhausted by 40 years of travel, and realizing that he can't stop the Lutherans or the Ottomans.
This leads to the most unique moment of his reign, the abdication.
Most kings die in their beds or on the battlefield. They hold on to power until the last breath.
They don't quit.
But Charles V had the self-awareness to realize the job was too big for one man. He recognized that his dream of universal monarchy had failed.
Paint the scene for us. It's Brussels, 1555.
It's in the Great Hall of the Kuttenberg Palace. The room is packed with nobles, knights, and dignitaries. Charles enters, but he can't stand on his own because of the gout.
He's leaning on someone.
He is leaning on the shoulder of a young man, William of Orange.
Which is ironic because William of Orange would later lead the Great Rebellion against Charles' son.
History loves irony. So Charles stands there, leaning on William, and he gives a speech. He recounts his travels, his wars, his efforts. He lists every journey.
And he's emotional.
He's crying. The audience is crying. It's highly emotional.
And he apologizes.
That is the part that gives me chills. A holy Roman emperor, an absolute monarch standing before his subjects and saying, I know I made mistakes. I never intended to harm anyone. And if I did, I ask for your forgiveness.
It was a moment of supreme humility.
Unheard of. And then he starts divvying up the empire like he's liquidating assets.
He realized the empire was ungovernable as a single unit. It was too big, so he split it. This is where we get the two branches of the Habsburgs.
His son, Philip II, gets the Spanish inheritance.
Philip gets the wealthy parts. Spain, the Americas, Italy, and the Netherlands. This becomes the Spanish Empire.
And his brother, Ferdinand.
Ferdinand had been running the German lands for years anyway, so Ferdinand gets Austria and the title of Holy Roman Emperor.
So Charles washes his hands of it all. Where does a retired emperor go? Florida.
Not quite. He went to a remote part of Spain, Extremadura, to the monastery of Yuste. He built a small, modest palace attached to the monastery. He wanted peace.
And he brought his clocks.
He was obsessed with clocks and watches. He filled his room with them. He employed a master clockmaker to keep them running. He spent hours trying to get them all to chime at the exact same second.
There's a heavy metaphor there.
Historians have always pointed it out. He spent his life trying to make Europe, different cultures, languages, religions, move in perfect unison. He failed.
And in retirement, he couldn't even get his clocks to agree.
It symbolizes the impossibility of total control. He died in 1558, and the last thing he held was the same cross his wife held when she died.
A poignant end. A man who owned the world, dying in a simple room, thinking of the wife he lost 20 years prior.
So let's wrap this up. When we look back at the source material, what is the takeaway from the life of Charles V?
He is the bridge between the Middle Ages and the modern world. He was the last attempt at a universal monarchy, a Christendom united under one ruler.
If you look at the scorecard, he failed to stop the Reformation, he failed to decisively defeat the Ottomans, and he bankrupted his kingdoms.
That sounds like a harsh report card.
It is. But look at what he held together. He kept the Ottomans out of Germany. He established the legal framework for the Spanish Empire that lasted centuries. He survived challenges that would have destroyed lesser states.
He held the line.
He held the line, and he showed us the physical and human limits of power.
Exactly. Even if you own the world, you are still just a man. You still get gout, you still grieve, and you still have to face your own conscience.
Here's a provocative thought to leave our listeners with. Charles V ordered a halt to his conquests to debate the morality of what he was doing.
He literally hit the pause button on empire building to ask, is this right?
It is a striking precedent. It's hard to imagine a modern superpower doing that.
Today, we are in an era of rapid expansion, not of land, but of technology. AI, bioengineering, globalization. We are conquering new frontiers at breakneck speed.
And the question is, do we have a Charles V moment in us? Are we capable of pausing the conquest to debate the morality of what we're building before it's too late?
Or will we just keep rolling the dice?
Something to think about. That's it for this deep dive into the CEO of the 16th century. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.